Friends, I greet you today in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, and thank you for being part of this ministry. We're going to continue in our preaching series and Bible study series looking at the book of Hebrews, and today in our Bible study we're going to Hebrews chapter 12. As I have mentioned before, that if you are listening to this perhaps for the first time and just wondering what has happened before, we have had a look in our sermons as well as our Bible studies at Hebrews 1 all the way through to Hebrews 11, and you're welcome to catch up on that whenever you've got the time. The chapters that have the odd numbers are the ones that we managed to do in the week for Bible studies, and the ones with the even numbers are the ones that we used in the sermons on a Sunday, if that makes sense to you. But they're all on the Fishhook Methodist YouTube page. Some of them are just audio files and some are obviously sermons and videos. So friends, as we gather today, let's turn to Hebrews 12 and we invite God's Spirit to be amongst us. And Lord, would you guide us in our conversation? So very firstly, the word that we see in verse 1 of Hebrews chapter 12, certainly if you're reading it in the NIV and the New Living Translation, is the word therefore. Now, we know that what he is going to refer to now after this has to link in with what has come before. And Hebrews 11 is that beautiful chapter we dealt with on Sunday where the men and women of faith, the hall of faith, has been mentioned. And every one of these people, their stories are known by the listeners, and they're known as people who trusted in God even when they couldn't see the outcome. They couldn't see the end from the beginning, but they stepped out in faith. And so this whole message, the whole book of Hebrews, is to encourage the Christians to keep going. Those who've converted from their Jewish roots to Christianity, as well as those who would come afterwards like ourselves, just to keep going even in the face of difficulty. So he starts off by writing, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a huge crowd of witnesses. So that is definitely referring to chapter 11. To the life of faith, let us strip off every weight that slows us down, especially the sin that so easily trips us up. And let us run with endurance the race God has set before us. So the image of running in a race, in a marathon, very well known for us today, but equally in this time, the idea of running and events and Olympics and all of that would have been known. So this understanding that when you're going to compete in a marathon, compete in any kind of running event, is that you need to be able to be as light as possible. That means that you don't run with a backpack on, you don't run with a whole lot of extra clothes on, you try not to run in big thick boots. You run so that you can run as easily as you can. Now the image here is that sin entangles us, sin brings us down, weighs us down, so that when we're running our Christian life, the idea of peeling off the layers, becoming as light as possible, is going to help us as we run the Christian race. The other word that he uses here is to run with endurance, which I think is always a good thing to mention, particularly to new Christians, is to say to them that this following God, being a Christ follower, is going to require perseverance and endurance. The race that's set before us is not a mad dash or a sprint, but it is a longer race, like a marathon, for example. He then says that we can do this by keeping our eyes on Jesus, the champion who initiates and perfects our faith. And I wonder if that word champion isn't deliberately used, because in the Colosseums and in the arenas, you would have people competing to be the best, the one who could outlast or the one who could, reach the finishing line first was seen as the champion. And we will be the champions, if you like, when we keep our eyes on Jesus, who is the ultimate champion. He's the one who initiates and perfects our faith. So we start following God because of Christ and the encounter we have with him, but he's also the one who helps us to complete that faith and basically take us through to the end. Because of the joy awaiting him, Jesus endured the cross, disregarding its shame, and now he is seated at the place of honor beside God's throne. I think within that part of verse 2, that's very much things we understand, that the cross was definitely an execution or a method of execution that brought shame to the person, shame to their families. And the writer is saying, listen, Jesus endured this shame because of what lay ahead. And now you will see that even as he goes into verse 3, he's trying to get the readers, you and I, and the people of his time, to see that in order to get the end prize, the joy, the salvation, if you like, we need to go through times of difficulty. So verse 3 says, think of all the hostility that he endured from sinful people. Then you won't become weary and give up. So it's this getting into our minds, and that word think is also the word consider, it's dwell upon. So when you're going through your tough time, when I'm going through my tough time, I'm feeling weary and I feel like I want to give up. What do? Well, I think back, I consider Jesus. Think about that his journey to sit at the throne with his Father was not an easy one. He had to endure, he had to persevere, he had to go through hostility, he endured the cross, all of those things for us. And so the call then is for you and I to consider that and then to keep going forward. Verse 4 is a bit of an add-on to that and says, after all, you have not yet given your lives in your struggle against sin. So some people in their Christian lives, particularly in countries where there's persecution, will end up sadly giving up their lives. But for the listeners, and obviously for ourselves, many of us won't have to go that far. So it's this kind of thought process that says, look, I haven't yet had to get to a point where my life has been in danger. So yes, I'm going through difficult times, hostility, trials and tribulations, but let me consider Christ, and that hopefully will motivate me to keep going forward. Verse 5 is a sudden shift in a way, but I think once we get through it, we'll understand why he mentions it. So he says, and have you, I'm now reading from the New Living, and have you entirely forgotten the encouraging words God spoke to you, his children? So these are the words of motivation he's saying, and then he says, hey, have you forgotten those words that God spoke to you? And remember, he throws in there, because you are his children. And then he gives this quote. So halfway through verse 5 and verse 6 is a quote, and it goes like this: my child, don't make light of the Lord's discipline, and don't give up when he corrects you, or don't be discouraged when he corrects you. For the Lord disciplines those he loves, and he punishes those he accepts as his children. Verse 7, as you endure this divine discipline, remember that God is treating you as his own children. Whoever heard of a child who was never disciplined? That's with a question mark, a rhetorical question, you know. Have you ever heard of a child who's never been disciplined? It's almost like inconceivable for the writer. Verse 8, if God doesn't discipline you as he does all of his children, it means that you are illegitimate and not really his child or his children after all. So one of the thoughts could be that when you're going through difficult times, and clearly these people were, they were thinking to themselves, is this a discipline from God? Because that's very much the Old Testament understanding. Going through difficult times, going through the wilderness, even in exile, God is refining us, God is disciplining us. We are his children. I mean, that's a very strong notion in the Jewish community. We are the children of God. And so he's throwing this out to the people to say, listen, when you go through tough times, whether it's God's discipline or whether it is just tough times, see it as God allowing this because he loves you, because you are his child. Now, I know for some of us that may be a struggle. That may be something that we find hard to imagine. You know, why would God do that? But then you ask a parent or an aunt or uncle or a grandparent or someone, when you look at your own children or people, young people that you know in your families, and you think, well, is it a loving or an unloving thing to give them guidance and parameters and discipline? And this is a wrestle for every parent as to, how far do you go in this? Because if you see behavior in a child that you feel is not correct, just by letting them carry on with the behavior they're not going to self-correct. Certainly not in our modern times. So you're caught with, how do you discipline? How do you correct? How do you lovingly show people the right way? And this is this image that the writer is saying. He's saying, listen, just because you are now following Jesus doesn't mean that God is no longer your Father. Because Jesus is the Son of God. Remember that. Jesus is the great high priest, which we've spoken about. Jesus is greater than Moses and Joshua and Aaron and all those who we consider to be up there, Abraham and so on. So what we are going to go through now is not because God has withdrawn his favor, but rather that God, as a father, is allowing these things to happen because we are then his children. And if you read verse 11, it says this: no discipline is enjoyable while it is happening. It is painful. But afterwards there will be a peaceful harvest of right living for those who are trained in this way. And so there almost is a reason as to why one goes through discipline, and ultimately for the perfect parent, you discipline your child not because you take delight in discipline, but rather because you want your child to live a better life or to be a better human being. Just to move the idea of discipline, shift it for a second, because often discipline is seen as that, as a punishment, or a parent and a child, or a teacher and a child, and so on. But let's come back to his first analogy that he shares, the picture of running in a marathon. And if you've ever run or walked any distance, you would know that you can't just get up off the couch and start to do something that is requiring an endurance or a long distance. You can't just get up off the couch having not exercised for a long time and saying, okay, right, I want to do a massive hike in the Cederberg, or if you're listening in KZN, in the Drakensberg Mountains. Or I want to get off my couch and I want to run a marathon next Sunday. We know it doesn't work because you're going to hurt yourself, and our bodies are not trained for that. So in the same way, maybe this discipline speaks to you and I of putting our minds to the faith, the discipline, the daily discipline of prayer, of reading the scriptures, of listening to God, the weekly discipline of worship, of attending perhaps a Bible study or a home group. It's that discipline that helps us. And if you look at this word about that peaceful harvest of right living for those who are trained in this way, we do this so we can keep our relationship with God alive, and we can keep fresh, and we can keep trained in what he wants us to do. So maybe that's another way of looking at that. Even just one more link in with that too, even as the students are busy writing exams at this time of the year, it's a very similar thing. The discipline of getting there, sitting at your desk, studying, preparing for the exam is not something that everybody wants to do. But we know that you can't just go into an exam, and particularly the higher up you go in the grades or at university, you can't just go into the exam and say, oh Lord, I haven't studied, but please, give me all the answers. The discipline of preparation and study is going to help in the end when you get into the exam, and hopefully you can answer most of the questions. Verse 12 is then a beautiful verse, and it's come up in other ways and worded slightly differently in chapter 10. But this, I think, is the heart, if you like, of the writer. So I'm going to read it because depending on which translation you read from, it may say slightly different things, but the sentiment is exactly the same. So let me read from the New Living first. It says this: so take a new grip with your tired hands and stand firm on your shaky legs. The NIV says, so take a new grip with your tired hands and strengthen your weak knees. And that's a beautiful thing, because wouldn't that apply to us also sometimes? We feel like our legs are shaky or our knees are shaky, and that's a spiritual feeling sometimes. So he's saying, well, take a new grip, reach out your hand to God again, and just get your legs a little bit firmer on that foundation. He then says, mark out a straight path for your feet. Then those who follow you, though they are weak and lame, will not stumble and fall, but will become strong. So this, and certainly in our Bible study last night, we were just sharing around this. This also brings in a greater sense of community responsibility and individual. So in his words, we're marking out a path. We're looking at the arena, the running race. We're looking at what's ahead. Mark it out. Clear the path for your own feet. In other words, try and remove the obstacles. Take off those things that hinder us, he says in verse 1. But then, kind of in the same breath, he's saying, for those who follow you, though they are weak and lame, they won't stumble and fall and will become strong. And this gives us the impression of guiding and teaching and helping others. Because for so long, our Western understanding of faith has been very personal. Now, there's nothing wrong with a personal faith. We must start always with a personal encounter with Jesus, and we surrender our lives to him. That's a choice we make individually and personally. But we are placed in a community of faith. We call ourselves the body of Christ. We use language talking about the family of God. We have a brother and a sister in Christ. We are one. And so what good is it if I run ahead or you run ahead and I come behind you and I am lame or weak and I keep tripping over obstacles and I'm not strong? It's not so much a case of me getting to the line or you getting to the line first and, to hang with everybody behind me. He is saying to the church here, look, we can help each other. So individually, take a firm grip, get your tired hands and strengthen your weak knees, but keep your path marked up, but also help those who come behind. And even if it's just to set an example, do that so they too will be strong. And one can really get a bit deeper into that verse, but a beautiful verse 12 and 13. He then says, verse 14, try to live in peace with everyone and seek to live a clean and holy life, for those who are not holy will not see the Lord. So again, we're saying like in the way we live our lives at peace and living clean and holy lives, those who are not holy, they won't see God unless perhaps they see him through us, see it our lives being different. And then it says, verse 15, look after each other so that none of you will miss out on the special favor of God. Watch out that no bitter root of unbelief rises up among you, for wherever it springs up, many are corrupted by its poison. So this again comes to the whole thing of community. We are the body of Christ. If there is a bitter root in a community, then that can cause all kinds of problems. It can trip us up. And we are called to look out for each other. He then goes into an interesting thing which speaks about immorality, speaks about Esau. And, one could probably do the whole Bible study just on this particular verse 16 and 17, because it takes us right back to the story of the blessing of Esau and Jacob. And you can go back and read that if you want in Genesis 25 and later on Genesis 27, how Esau came in and he was hungry and he sold his birthright to his brother Jacob. And then when he came later on to get the blessing, his father couldn't give it to him anymore because he'd already given it to Jacob. And it's this picture and obviously the story that's told throughout the generations in the oral tradition as well as in the written scriptures of how if you make a choice, and particularly Esau, the scholars would say that he made the choice very flippantly. He made it to satisfy his instant desire. He was hungry and he was willing to do anything to feed his gut at that time. And so he probably in his own mind flippantly said, yes, no, I'll give you my birthright. Just give me some of that stew. not thinking that he would actually be held accountable for that. And so this, I think, is a call for not just the church then, but also us now, is to not give in to the things that would hopefully make us satisfied in the immediate, because we live in a world that is instant gratification, because sometimes those things are actually not of God. And then later on, we realize we're actually so far from God because we've gone to please the gut, or to please the body, and we haven't actually pleased the spirit. So, yeah, as I say, because of time, we can't go too deep in that, but just have a reflection on that and maybe go back and read that story of Jacob and Esau. Obviously, Jacob himself wasn't without fault, but it's interesting that he mentions Esau here. Then he goes back into another idea of the Old Testament, the covenant, where the mountain and Mount Sinai was, and Moses went up the mountain and received the 10 Commandments. It's a picture of terror and fear and reverence, and almost like God can't be seen and you can't get close to him. But then 22 onwards, it's another picture of how we can. You've come to God himself, he says, verse 23, and you can enter into that place. Jesus is the one who welcomes you. He brings the new covenant. He brings forgiveness and grace. So it's this comparison again. Don't forget, we've been speaking about this all the time. The old covenant reminded you of the law, reminded you of your guilt and your sin, and it still didn't have the effect of changing us on the inside. But it's Christ who can do that. So he speaks about that, and the imagery he uses there is quite clear, especially when you've read the other chapters beforehand. He says, see to it that you obey God, the one who is speaking to you. For if the people of Israel did not escape when they refused to listen to Moses, the earthly messenger, how terrible our danger if we reject the one who speaks to us from heaven. So it's just a little bit of a challenge and a reminder. We must listen to Jesus, listen out to God through Christ. And then he speaks again, and I'll just bring it to a close now, about the kingdom that we're going to inherit as a kingdom that can't be destroyed, but it's a kingdom that comes from God. And we shouldn't take it flippantly, but we should worship God with holy fear and awe. So I like the way he's ended that. I mean, it may be a bit confusing, but he's not saying that the New Testament and the New Covenant is just like, do what you like and everything's going to be fine. He does speak about worshiping God in this new kingdom that has been bought with a price, that we should honor God, revere God, and love God. And he's just given us some ways to do that. The interesting thing about Hebrews 12, possibly to think on, is that this is a shift now in the whole book from having looked in the past, looking at the old covenant, the old heroes of the faith, to looking more at the future. So how can we, when we look past, embrace what lies ahead? And he's given us this idea, fix your eyes on Jesus, run the race, be prepared for endurance, take off the things that are going to hinder you, let go of that sin. Remember that what we are running towards, the prize we're running towards, is like something we've never seen before. It's a gift from God. And so then when you're going to come to chapter 13 on Sunday, it is a final word, a concluding word for all of us. But I do think that 12 and 13, maybe even the end of 11, is also changing our focus and our direction to say, let us look into the future, knowing what we know from the past, and let us set our mind towards this. Let us be focused in following Christ. Friends, these are just a few of my thoughts on Hebrews 12. Thank you for giving me the time in that. Like always, remember that these are just a few thoughts to spark you off and to get you hopefully digging a bit deeper into the passage yourself. God bless you, and if it's been helpful, by all means, you're welcome to share it with others. Have a good week. Amen.